This is a Fox News alert. We have just learned, as Carly was talking, that Dick Cheney has died. We're learning more information as we do. We will continue to pass that along to you, of course. We just literally got this information a few seconds ago.
He was chief of staff under Gerald Ford. He was former Secretary of Defense under George H.W. Bush. He went on to be vice president for 2 terms with George W. Bush and is considered the conservatives' conservative, a very hardliner, someone extremely competent, and someone who dealt with heart issues in his 30s and has dealt with that his entire life.
They're saying that he died last night at the age of 84, and we just received a statement from his family. Ainsley, you want to read this?
Sure. It says Richard B. Cheney, the 46th Vice President of the United States, died last night, November 3rd, 2025. He was 84 years old. His beloved wife of 61 years, Lynn, his daughters Liz and Mary and other family members were with him as he passed. The former vice president died due to complications of pneumonia and cardiac and vascular disease. For decades, Dick Cheney served our nation, including as White House Chief of Staff, Wyoming's Congressman, Secretary of Defense, and Vice President of the United States. Dick Cheney was a great and good man who taught his children and grandchildren to love our country and to live lives of courage, honor, love, kindness, and fly fishing. We are grateful beyond measure for all Dick Cheney did for our country, and we are blessed beyond measure to have loved and been loved by this noble giant of a man.
So he was somebody who comes to mind with the Persian Gulf War. I remember him combining with the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colin Powell, as Secretary of Defense. And it was the first time we had substantial military action, really, since Vietnam. And he was able to put together a brilliant strategy of coming up through taking Kuwait back with over 500,000 troops and going right through and stopping short of taking Baghdad, because that was the mandate forward. He was somebody that could withstand a great deal of criticism, be unflappable under pressure. He was a perfect Sunday show because he was able to defend whether it was President George H.W. Bush or George W. Bush in controversial times.
Yeah, Brian, and I think we have to talk about the elephant in the room is with him being side by side with former President Bush during 9/11 in Afghanistan and the wars there, and because he was known as a tactician as well, a big loss for the country as well, dedicated his life to public service and was known as a hawk on the Republican side of the aisle.
Speaking of 9/11, it was President George W. Bush who ended up, I think, touching down in Nebraska on Air Force One after that flight he was giving remarks in that Florida grammar school. It was Dick Cheney who was really in charge. And they had to quickly put him in the White House and put him in place and interacting with the president. But for a while, he was indeed in charge. And America could know, as a vice president, with a new president who was just known with a famous name, but just serving as governor, immediately he got credibility on that ticket because of his international experience. And he was in charge of screening vice presidential candidates. And he turned around and one day had a conversation with W and just said, hey, by the way, I could probably do this job. And he said, you're the perfect pick. You got it.
He was an American politician. He is the father of Liz Cheney, who went against Donald Trump, as you know. I don't think he ever spoke out against Donald Trump, but he was part of the old guard of the Republican Party.
He did at moments, but he's definitely, Brian, to your point, known as the person that had the foreign policy chops. When you select a vice president, it always is about what that person can add to the ticket. And with George W. Bush being from Texas and being a governor, he just really didn't have that experience, even though his father was president. And they put this guy on the ticket, Dick Cheney, the former vice president, to give that assurance to the voters. Okay, you got someone, the second in command, that's going to bring that to the table there.
What's so interesting is that him and Donald Rumsfeld were fast friends since they both served in the Ford administration. The young guys on a major transition in this country as Richard Nixon resigns. The vice president who filled in for Spiro Agnew, never voted into office, becomes president. He needed experience around him. And they bring in these young guys named Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, who becomes, I think, the youngest defense secretary ever. Maybe I think Pete perhaps beats him now, Pete Hegseth, the current Secretary of War. But he comes in, they do a very significant job during that time, goes back into Congress, and then comes back into office with H.W. Bush at a time in which Saddam Hussein is on the march, taking Kuwait, and he was able to bring us through a very difficult time. Now, his arguments with Trump is a former vice president who was sticking up for his daughter. which people can thoroughly understand. But in terms of conservatives and being Republican, he's been extremely loyal to his party.
He was definitely at the helm of a critical time in our country when we were combating, it's almost like we're repeating history right now when it comes to radical Islamic terrorism and what you should do when you capture those folks on foreign land. And he navigated that very well and made the case that these folks want to cause us harm. And we need to get as much information as we can in the process to prevent future attacks.
Did so much for our country. 46th vice president. He served under 2 terms alongside George Bush from 2001 until 2009, and was one of the leaders that took us into the Iraq War during that time. There was 9/11. He is dead at the age of 84. Cardiovascular disease, cardiac and vascular disease, and pneumonia. And Brian, you said he had heart problems early on.
His whole life. And I think he got a heart transplant at one point. I could be corrected on that, but they addressed it, and he was able to live out his life to 84 years old when you have heart problems in your 30s. So you certainly, as somebody that knows what it's like to know no one promises you tomorrow. The other thing about Dick Cheney I think was significant that just talks about his career. In the beginning, everyone thought that he was in charge of the White House, and that was never the case.
Right.
And not only by the end of his second term was it clear that George W. Bush was in charge, there was a bit of rift between the two because George W. Bush decided to make a change after the midterm elections that did not go well, and he pulled out Rumsfeld and he put in Bob Gates, longtime friend of Dick Cheney, and Gates started taking a more prominent role in putting together the surge, the change of tactics, along with General Keane, David Petraeus, and others that really had Iraq, which was almost a disaster, turning into one of the most brilliant military maneuvers of our time when you think about how the surge took back Iraq and delivered a calm, quiet Iraq to Barack Obama.
Well, Brian, to that point, it was a change in doctrine, more heavily focused, although there was infantrymen there, it was a special operations driven missions throughout the Middle East out there. And there were some detractors at the moment. The president thought he had the right idea about that, which is why they put Bob Gates right there. Barack Obama ended up bringing him into his administration afterwards. But I'm sure he's been really private, except for some comments in support of his daughter. But he's been in Wyoming for a while. They got that big ranch out there. And it looks like things had just turned for the worse for him. And he is now gone at the age of 84.
Yeah, before being vice president, he dedicated his life to the service of this country. He was our vice president. He was our Secretary of Defense, the 17th United States Secretary of Defense. He was the House Minority Whip. He was chairman of the House Republican Conference. He was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Wyoming's at-large district. He was the White House Chief of Staff under Gerald Ford, as Brian said, White House Deputy Chief of Staff under Ford at first. He was married to Lynn, and they had 2 girls, Liz and Mary. He went to Yale University, University of Wyoming for his BA, and University of Wisconsin-Madison he also attended.
And I know that he also took some courageous stands when it came to same-sex marriage because his daughter was a lesbian, and he took that. And a lot of people on the right were saying, "Wow, he's going against doctrine." Well, he says, "Well, I've seen the reality, and now America has come across on that." Remember, President Bush ran on traditional marriage, and then by the end of that, the country had really changed. Remember, Barack Obama said marriage is between a man and a woman. He got elected. By the second term, America had changed, but he was actually ahead. Conservatives are known for holding on to their principles, but there he was along with society changing.
Brian, I think it's fair to also say, as we remember on this day, obviously a patriot to this country, cared about our military, cared about the foundational institutions of the country. But for many people on the other side of the aisle, they really painted him as a boogeyman for many, many years.
And he was okay with it.
And he kind of embraced it and took some fire for the president of the United States as well, even though it was George Bush making all of the moves there was an attempt to make it seem as if it was Dick Cheney all along, and he just took it in.
He is a member of the United Methodist Church. He was the first Methodist vice president to serve under a Methodist president.
So another thing about Dick Cheney, I think it's important to point out, like so many presidents and vice presidents, when they get out of office, they weren't nearly as close There was some controversy about a pardon that Dick Cheney wanted to see done that wasn't done. They left office the way they did, and he did not have as much influence on George W. Bush at the end that he had in the beginning. But it didn't mean they weren't cordial to each other, and there's certainly no bitterness on President Bush 43's part. I expect, if the statement's not out already, I expect a warm statement to be out, because the Bush family and the Cheneys overall, there's a lot of mutual respect there, and there's a lot of history there, too.
He did have a long history of cardiovascular disease. According to this article I'm reading, they said that he had a periodic need for urgent health care. It raised questions about if he was medically fit, apparently, to serve in public office. He smoked approximately 3 packs of cigarettes per day for nearly 20 years.
I never knew that. Really?
Yeah, I didn't either, but a lot of people did back then. Cheney had his first of 5 heart attacks on June 18th of 1978 at the age of 37. He had a lot of heart surgeries as well.